mistake that the US Army did. Exactly the same mechanism. Exactly. And at the end of the day, the problem was not to know if we were able to dominate Algeria and to keep Algeria friends. It was the problem of a population who was looking for independence. So it was not the same. And now we can say, thanks God, because do you imagine a France with 30 million of Muslims? The Republic would not have been the same taste, probably. So it was another world. But at that time, a big difference with now, the political aspect was decolonization, independence. But at that time, we had no reference to religiosity. Islam was not something which was taken into account. Now it is. Now, back to your question,
Sure.
just a final point. Al-Qaeda, you cannot topple down a country like the US, like France, like Great Britain. They are not boxing in the same category. You can disturb a country, but you cannot topple down and win a war. It's not the same level.
Allô? Oh.
Pour revenir à votre... sorry.
In English.
Okay. To go back to the beginning of your presentation with all the conflicts in the world and the fact that under the UN, European Union, NATO, we keep on intervening everywhere. And about the limited budget that the armed forces are getting in Europe. Everywhere in the world, the military budget increasing except Europe. And given all these new conflicts and expanding and everlasting conflicts where we never disengage, do you think that on the long run, Europe is basically shrinking? And it will be shrinking in terms of influence in the world?
The military is only one part of the equation. You see, you cannot, and I will make a little bit of history and philosophy again. You cannot finger point Europe not spending enough for its defense at a time when Europe, who had known and triggered so many wars, that now we are not pushing back to militarization. We, in Europe, for the first time ever in our history, and many centuries, 1,000 years ago, we have not been at war. It's the longest period of peace that Europe has known. Since 1945, Europe is at peace, except the Yugoslavia crisis, but at peace. The people of Europe, the different nations of Europe, are reluctant to go back to the militarization. It's a movement which is deep and which is something that I believe is strong. We are willing, for instance, in the relationship between Russia and Europe, or Russia and NATO, Europe is more inclined to have to shake hands with Russia rather than to compete. And that was a great dividing factor inside NATO and between a certain number of European capitals and Washington. We have accused the previous US government in Europe to push in the ropes too much the Russians with pushing Georgia to solve this problem itself, with trying to attract as much as we can and not sometimes with a great not with much finesse, Ukraine into NATO, NATO expansion, NATO this, NATO that, and finally, the missile defense system close to the border of Russia. If you see that from Washington, you can understand. If you go back to Russia, to Moscow, and if you see that from Moscow, this penetration, this expansion of Western and NATO system with bases, NATO bases in Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, you can be a little bit upset. And so the Russians have to be understood also. And we like it or not, Russia is in Europe, not in America. And we need Russia. And it would be better to have agreement through additional trades, commerce, energy supplies, to be linked by money rather than to be opposed by military hardware. That is the basic rule. In the long run, not on the short term, in the long run, what is the interest of Europe? To go back to militarization? To rearm Germany? To see Poland again threatening his neighbor? Now it's when you are in the EU, and I was in EU, I have been the first general in EU. It was a revolution, and it was very clear in my mind to see the feeling of most of the European politicians and diplomats of a certain reluctance to have a military tool. Alors, this military tool may be useful in certain circumstances, but on a limited scale, in addition to what is greater, that is to say, all the additional assets that Europe has. And Europe is the only organization who has the totality of the scope. It is the reason why now, for instance, in Kosovo, it's not NATO who has the lead, but more and more EULEX, let's say the 2,000 EU civilian civil servant trying to build a state from scratch and imposing in Bosnia the same, and trying to convince Serbia on the long run that his own interest is inside EU and not fighting a new war against the Catholics and the Muslims, like it was, et cetera, et cetera. So Europe is has a total different mindset. And what we judge, seen from Europe, it's probably the overweight, the military overweight of America. And when you have this overweight, but when you have a tool like this, you have the tendency to use it. Madeleine Albright said that to General Powell some years ago.
General, thank you very much. Romers, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm afraid I have to be the guardian of time, and the General does have a dinner later. There is so much to talk about here. I want to thank you both for your comments. I wish we could have talked a little bit about really what happened in the year 800 with Charles Martel beating back the Muslims from France, because I think in some ways perhaps that is also part of the discussions that we need to have, but we don't have time for that one. We'll have to have another session with the General and with Muresh. Thank you very much, both of you, for having come here tonight and stimulated us in this way with this conversation. I now invite you in the card room, or whatever it's called, right on your right as you exit this room.